everybody? It's Dakota, and today I'm going to be going over probably one of the best new decks that we have in the Pioneer format that kind of abuses some new cards, or new card rather, that we got from Theros Beyond Death to essentially win the game and hopefully beat those pesky through the breach decks. So we're going to be looking at Dimir Inverter of Truth today. Basically, what this deck is trying to set up is playing an Inverter of Truth with either an empty or near empty graveyard, and then casting a Thassa's Oracle, which lets you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. You can put up to one of them on top of your library, the rest in the bottom in a random order. And then if your devotion to blue is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So essentially, why that's important is because Inverter of Truth does, in fact, exile your library face down, and then you shuffle all the cards in your graveyard into your library, which essentially means that your graveyard becomes your library. And even if you can, you put like 4, 5, 6 cards in your graveyard, and that becomes your library. There's still a 6/6 flyer that your opponent has to deal with. So you could, in theory, kill them with this card anyway, rather than comboing them essentially. Or you have cards like Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, that can just get you closer to winning as well by milling yourself, drawing a card, then milling yourself, draw a card, then you just win the game by the static ability of Jace. Or you could still Thassa's Oracle and kill your opponent that way. It'll just take a few extra turns. So basically, that's how you win. That's how this deck wins. That's how it wins in the main deck. So going over the spells that kind of help you to perpetuate your game plan and really just kind of like drive it home. Uh, Playing cards like Fatal Push is just really good removal. Probably the best removal we have in the format. It gets even better with cards like Fabled Passage and Ipnu Rivulet, because that triggers the Revolt on the Fatal Push, which can kill other Inverter of Truths, can kill Thassa's Oracles with their trigger on the stack. Does not stop it if there's 0 cards in the library from them winning the game, but it does if they have 1 or less or whatever, where they would win the game, but they still have cards in the library, then you can just stop them from winning the game, essentially. Thoughtseize and Thought Erasure are just really good disruptive pieces with the Lotus Field breach decks in mind. Being able to have discard spells that can disrupt them and stop them from being able to combo off on turn 3 or turn 4 of the game. Having cards like Thoughtseize and Thought Erasure are necessary evils. Thought Erasure having the upside of being able to surveil as well. You can do it when there is no cards to take with Thought Erasure, but usually getting to take a card and surveil is pretty good, and you can just mill past cards that you don't want. And while it seems like it's a non-bow with like Inverter of Truth and things like that, there is a way that you can just like put cards that you want in the graveyard into the graveyard, and then when you Inverter of Truth, like, it just gives you a ton of value and disrupts your opponent and knocks them off any interaction they could have to interact with your combo. So Thought Erasure, Thoughtseize, really good cards, key cards in the deck when playing against some of the other combo decks that don't want to interact with you, to then stop them from getting to do their thing, so you can set up your chance to win. Censor, Draw on the Lock are essentially just the counter spells for the deck. Draw on the Lock gets better as the game goes along. You know, I've said it in Modern. I'm pretty sure I've even said it for some standard decks too in the past. But like, this card is just very good. Can counter basically up the chain as much as you want. I guess versus like the ramp decks, it's not very great. But against any other deck that's like trying to either combo off or be this sort of like mid-rangey deck, especially when we're playing Thoughtseizes, Thought Erasures, Fatal Push, things like that. This card just kills and counters just about anything that's going to be relevant. Sensor too feels really dang good to get someone with a sensor. Cycles in the worst case, while it seems like it's kind of counterintuitive, the fact that it does cycle makes this a little bit better, for the fact that like, even if you inverter it back into your smaller library, you can just cycle past it to either get closer to the Thassa's Oracle or Jace that's in the graveyard, or just get to whatever place that you need to get, so that Jace or Thassa's Oracle just wins you the game. Moving on to like the other spells, I guess I didn't really go over Hero's Downfall. Hero's Downfall is just a really good removal spell. Catch all for planeswalkers, creatures. Interesting that a murderous rider isn't here. Mainly because like it could just go into the library instead of going to the graveyard. But there's also times where like the 2 life does matter. So like uh, you could probably interchange both of them because I just don't have a better reason to tell you to not play one over the other. But Hero's Downfall, uh, any kind of those effects, really good when dealing with opposing planeswalkers. Can also get your opponent's Jace Wielder mysteries off the table in the mirror matches if they play Jace instead of playing Thassa's Oracle, which is really good. And probably the most broken card in the deck, Dig Through Time. Lets you control the cards that you have in the graveyard. So even if you have like 10, 12 cards in the graveyard, getting that down to 4 to 6 cards, and then also being able to find like your combo piece or like dig for your combo pieces, just makes Dig Through Time really good, really powerful. Uh, was looking at getting banned last Monday, has not yet. So hopefully we get to keep this card because I like playing with it in blue white control. But if it gets banned, I'm not going to be surprised, and I probably won't be too unhappy if it does or not. There's also one Omen of the Sea, which is just another. It's like essentially a draw spell that doesn't go to your graveyard, and like it can later, but like the fact that it has the utility of like being an instant speed preordain, and then obviously getting into scry 2, it digs towards your combo pieces. It it draws cards and it doesn't go to your graveyard either, so it helps on that front when you're trying to Inverter of Truth with the least amount of cards in your graveyard to then become your library, and hopefully that those cards that do get shuffled in are high impact cards that either can win you the game or disrupt your opponent from them stopping you from winning the game. So that's what the main deck looks like for the most part. Pretty, I think this is pretty stock right now for the most part, but for that I'm not entirely sure. But like this all looks right to me. I don't think there's any major changes that I would make to the main deck. But if we go to the mana base, things like that, you have looks like 12 dual lands. You have the 4 Watery Grave, 4 Drowned Catacomb, 2 Choked Estuary, which come into play untapped if you reveal a swamp or an island, and then Fetid Pools is just comes into play tap, but it cycles. You have an Ipinu Rivulet, which seems kind of weird, but apparently this is really good in either the Inverter mirrors and against Breach as well. Kind of got a brief explanation why, and I guess I don't quite fully understand it. If anyone who sees this video wants to explain it a little bit more to me and like talk about it, I would appreciate it. I could see where it has like its utilities and things like that, but I didn't think it was that like high impact enough to make that much of a difference. 4 Fatal Passes we talked about earlier can enable Revolt for Fatal Push. Um, I guess I don't quite understand why, because if you don't want to put cards in the graveyard, like why would you want to play Fabled Passage? But I'm guessing that at some point you have to have some kind of like mana fixing, and this just does it very well in this 2 color deck. 5 islands, 2 swamps, and the reason why you can play less swamps than islands really is because of this herb board. Just turns everything into a swamp, and you're playing a bunch of dual lands. And sometimes you just want untapped island or untapped blue source more than untapped black source, too. Even though you have a decent number of untapped black sources as well on turn 1, and in the case that you need to play like a Fatal Push or a Thoughtseize, things like that. To the sideboard, Damping Sphere is really good against Lotus Field because obviously their spells cost more, and the Lotus Field taps for a colorless mana instead of producing the 3 colored mana. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is a card that I'm kind of surprised doesn't see more play in the format. I think it's a really good card. I'd seen playing like the Sultai Delirium decks. In I think in the main deck, I think it's like 1 or 2 copies. But this being played in the sideboard gives you a little bit more ability to like grind in some of the other matchups. Negate because we can't play Dovin's Veto. Legion's End deals a lot really well with like the mono black threats, just getting rid of their recursive threats by just exiling them, taking whatever in their hand with the same name, and then all the cards in their graveyard as well with the same name. Just really good, just really good against mono black, and enough that you need to respect the deck. Honestly, Pack Rat. There's nothing scarier to a control player when your opponent goes turn 2 Pack Rat, turn 3 start making rats, especially in a format that has Mutavault and where the aggro decks are playing for Mutavaults as well. Obviously, we're not, but like Pack Rat is still just a really good card, and I think a card that doesn't get played enough or doesn't see enough play, in my personal opinion. But nonetheless, still a really good card, worth the sideboard slots. Cry against like the smaller like creature decks. Hero another Hero's Downfall for problematic planeswalkers. Mystical Dispute gives you some 1 mana interaction on turn one for your opponent's like strategic plannings when you're on the draw and other things like that. Just a really good card against the breach decks, and even in the mirror, it can be pretty good too. Witch's Vengeance. There's a mono black or a black white vampires deck that's running around. So like this and like Languish deals with those effectively. Languish can also deal with like a lot of like the mono red threats because they do have like a lot of 3 and 4 toughness things. So Languish just kind of cleans up all those very nicely. And then one Kalitas because there is a graveyard dredge deck in the format, and Kalitas does a very good job of like blocking all of their threats, while you also have like a ton of removal for dealing with them. And then if Kalitas gets to make like 2, 3, 4 zombies before he dies, and you've gained 6, 9 life off of him, like he's basically done his job in terms of what you would expect against like the dredge deck. Because then you've obviously exiled like 3, 4 of their creatures, and then like your deck is still full of removal spells, and you have 8 power in play. So Khalid just a really solid sideboard slot and really good against those graveyard decks. And that's it for Dimir Inverter of Truth. If this deck doesn't get anything banned from it, this and Lotus Breach are probably going to be the top 2 decks in the format and continue to be. And Thoughtseize is going to probably prove to be one of the best cards to be playing in the format if your opponents are just going to try to combo off, essentially, either with Lotus Field and all their twiddle effects, or Inverter of Truth plus Thassa's Oracle or Jace Wielder of Mysteries. So definitely something to keep out for. It's gonna be interesting to see how the metagame shifts and everything like that. Um, I would expect like next Monday there being a banning for probably Dig Through Time. Like even though it kind of kills me because I love Dig Through Time, I've cast that card so much in Standard and it was great. That and Siege Rhino, but like that's neither here nor there. But if Dig Through Time does get banned, like maybe this deck still gets to live in some capacity. Like you could play Treasure Cruise. It lets you see a ton of cards and delves like one more, but you don't get to play it at instant speed. It probably digs less for your combo, but like you still get to see like the maximum amount of cards for 1 mana. So that could be something to look out for. But anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video. Comment down below if there's a specific Pioneer deck that you want to see, or if there's certain cards that are in Pioneer that you want to see, and I can review specifically those decks that play those cards. Anything like that, any sort of feedback of that is also greatly appreciated. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the